Hi Yogi, welcome back to another episode of the Lights On podcast, where we discover, reflect, and unpack fundamental yoga teachings to apply in everyday life. If you're new, my name is Kat and I'm your host. I'm also a certified yoga teacher, passionate about practicing and teaching traditional yoga and yoga philosophy. Through this podcast, I hope to show you that a life with more peace and more purpose is totally possible, and that traditional yogic philosophy is an incredible source of knowledge and a big inspiration to help us accomplish exactly that, more peace and purpose. Today we are talking about something that is very close to my heart, and so today I decided to do this a little bit unscripted. So I usually have a few bullet points, which I do have today, but I tend to have, I'm very much a person that likes to be prepared, so I usually write things down before I do record the podcast. So today I'm not doing that, because I wanted today's episode to be a bit more informal. And today's topic is all about anxiety and how devotion and surrender can be two incredible, I would say, tools to put us on the path to heal our anxiety. So these two words may be raising a few eyebrows, but stay with me, and I'll explain you the reasoning, but also share a bit of my experience struggling with anxiety for pretty much all my life. So going into the topic and telling you a bit more about my journey with it. So as I've just mentioned, I have been struggling with anxiety all my life. It wasn't exactly something that I was very aware of up until I started practicing yoga, interestingly enough. But I've always felt a bit unsafe in general in regards to myself, to my place in the world. I've also felt a bit unsure when I relate, or I used to relate to others. So this sort of on edge feeling that I feel like has been following me all my life. But my anxiety really had this peak when I was in university. I was about 19 or 20 years old. I was doing I think it was my last year. At uni, I was studying business management in a pretty competitive business school, and at that time, I was fully on it. I've always been, as I'm sure you will relate, if you also experience anxiety, you tend to be an overachiever. You tend to be always overcompensating just to prove that you're enough. I think this is a pretty common coping mechanism for all of us that experience anxiety since a young age. Again, at the time, this coping mechanism, I was not aware of it. But anyway, I was always at the top of my class. Studying was a big priority. Having the best grades was a big part of my identity, and I definitely sought external validation a lot, which in hindsight obviously doesn't help anxiety at all. So anyways, that the whole university experience was a pretty overwhelming one. That there was a lot of people. I was no longer at the top of my class. I was by all means a decent student and a good student, but I wasn't anymore, that bright star of every class, which for me was a pretty big deal. And actually my self-esteem took a big hit, which I think intensified my anxiety and just these feelings of inadequacy. Through my journey with anxiety and how anxiety expressed within me was that at the time I struggled with breathing. So my breath was very shallow, and I struggled being able to breathe sometimes. And I also noticed that my heart raced, and it's almost as if I was skipping a beat, every once in a while, which was actually quite scary when you're experiencing it. But then as I was going through this and thinking to myself, this is just how it is. This is just how I experience life, how I go about life. I wasn't really aware that I was experiencing something that I shouldn't, that life could actually be peaceful and with joy and a lot more carefree. It was at the time that yoga found me. And I say that yoga found me and not that I found yoga, because I genuinely feel like this was very much a calling, something that was presented to me and that I felt immediately drawn towards. It wasn't something that I seeked necessarily. So one day, out of the blue, I decided to type into Google yoga classes near me. Like, I have literally, at this point, never thought about yoga before. It was so strange that just one random day, I typed this into Google. And I think it was just, because I was experiencing so much at the time, and it was such a confusing and such an uncomfortable and scary moment for me, that I think my unconscious side was very much like, no, she needs a coping mechanism, she needs an outlet, and she needs to let that anxiety go. So I think it was my unconscious, pulling me towards yoga. So anyway, I decided to visit the yoga center that popped up first on the Google listing. And I signed up for classes then and there again, like no questions asked, I just did it. And then that following Saturday, I attended my very first yoga class. And it was during that yoga class that I really felt myself relax in a very long time, which then made me realize that the stress, the anxiety wasn't who I was and wasn't something that I should be experiencing all the time. I had this version of myself that was calm, happy, smiley, that just wasn't coming out anymore, because it was sort of being held hostage by anxiety and stress. And actually, yoga classes were incredibly important to put me really on a path to release anxiety and more importantly, learn how to manage my anxiety symptoms. Because, and I'm sure it's the same for you, when you struggle with anxiety, you certainly have, anxiety goes a bit like waves, right? It's a bit like a roller coaster. You have highs and lows. So it's really important for you, or for us struggling with anxiety, to know what works for us and to use those tools when we are indeed going through a particularly bad anxiety crisis. So for me, yoga provided me that. Yoga taught me to breathe a lot more consciously, which helps control your mind, get you out of overwhelming and panic situations. Also, just a practice in general that worked a bit like a reset for me. So, I could be going through an enormous amount of pressure, an enormous amount of stress, but I knew that on Saturday from 11 to 12:30, I had an hour and a half, or actually 2 hours, I think, 2 hours that I was just dedicating fully to myself. That was going to help me relax and unwind, And I remember when I started becoming very passionate about yoga and talking about it, sharing my experience with other people, I used to describe yoga as literally my sanity, because it was literally the place for me to really rest and relax. And that was so, so important to me at the time. But anyway, yoga was very useful and helpful to reduce my anxiety, help me manage my anxiety symptoms. But it was actually another side of yoga that has put me on the path to healing my anxiety. Now, I know that when I say the word healing, it's a bit of a loaded word, right? It's so big, healing anxiety. But I do believe that these two things that we're going to talk about, surrender and devotion, can indeed help you erase and completely get rid of anxiety. I do. Just because of my experience and a few things that I've learned over the past, I would say, few years. I do believe that they are instrumental if you do want to get rid of anxiety, period, and not just control it, not just manage it. So let me just tell you a bit more about this and why I think devotion and surrender play such crucial roles when dealing and healing anxiety. So I told you already that my yoga practice, which consisted of a traditional yoga practice, meaning that at the time, I was experiencing a lot more than just the physical side of yoga. I was very lucky to be part of a lineage and a school that very much taught had an integrated approach to yoga. So we covered breathing practices, we covered kriya, cleansing, toning techniques. We covered meditation, which is what I also cover as a yoga teacher. We covered concentration exercises, energy locks. So there was a lot to it, and I certainly experienced yoga as a whole and not just something that is focused only about our physical bodies and the fitness practice. It was a lot more than that. And I think this more than that is really, really important, because as you navigate the physicality of the practice, you also learn other things while doing the physical poses, while doing the physical part of the practice. And for me, it was very life-changing that the yoga I was practicing had this big, I would say, spiritual knowledge associated with it, which in turn taught me about devotion and surrender. Devotion and surrender, they are a big part of the ethical system of yoga philosophy, and they are by no means easy to understand and or to practice, especially if you, like me, grew up in very pretty much Western culture, where devotion can sometimes raise a few eyebrows and turn a few heads. So for this next part of the podcast, as we dive a little deeper into these two concepts, I ask you just to keep your mind open. Certainly the purpose of me chatting here with you today is not to sort of teach you anything necessarily. It's more about sharing my experience and also encouraging your reflection about surrender, about devotion. So I'm not here to recommend anything necessarily, but I'm here to have you ask some questions to yourself, reflect, inquire, and come up with your own answers and with your own opinions about devotion and surrender. So anyway, I think as I was saying before, the physical part of the yoga practice was helping me manage my symptoms. At this point, I was a lot more relieved than I had ever been. I think at that point, I was able to use the breathing practices and all the learnings to manage my anxiety crisis when they did come. But I wasn't necessarily feeling that my anxiety was improving or reducing. So I knew how to handle it, but I still experienced it pretty often. And actually it took me a while, because I do feel like it takes you a while, and it certainly takes you many years of yoga before you can come to this point. The reason being is that yoga can work a bit like a cleansing process. So we are, as human beings, impacted by our surroundings, by everything that we eat, by everything that we see, that we watch, that we are witnesses to, and that has an impact on the body and on the mind. So you can see this as us being a bit like a mirror, and as we go through life, that mirror gets really, really dirty. So yoga can be seen as a tool to wipe that mirror clean, so that you can see more and more clearly as you practice yoga, which in turn helps you realize a few things about life in general, two of them being surrender and devotion. So I do feel like you need a solid yoga practice, and you need to trust the process before you reach necessarily these two conclusions that I reached, because at this point I've been practicing yoga for 9 years. And the 7th year is indeed a turning point. So again, I was experiencing anxiety. I wasn't seeing necessarily that big of an improvement with it, even though I knew how to manage my anxiety crisis. And it was only when I started interacting and practicing a bit more the spiritual side of yoga that I started seeing a shift on how I experience things and how I react to things, which in turn does decrease my anxiety because I'm not so uncertain anymore, and I also don't need to be in control anymore, which is very good if you're a person that struggles with anxiety, because if you think about it, we are anxious because we don't know what's going to happen, and we know that we have zero control over what is about to happen, even though we desperately want control. These two things are really big sources of anxiety, and surrender and devotion help you let go of these two things, of these two fears, and allow you to be a lot more, have a lot more trust. And you'll also become, which is interesting, a lot more confident about yourself, about how resilient you are, and about your capacity to really face any challenge that comes your way, which is so empowering, and such a big source of relief to me. And also this understanding that you are a lot more than you think you are, a lot bigger, a lot better, and a lot more capable than you think you are, which also is very good to your own self-esteem and your confidence. But more now about specifically devotion and surrender, I just wanted to explain it to you a bit more about these concepts. So let's start with devotion, which I think is probably the word that will raise more eyebrows here, and it certainly did for me when I first interacted with this more spiritual side of yoga, because I was I am a very skeptical person and very cynical. So I certainly have a big critical thinking head, which doesn't shut off very often. So for me, devotion would definitely raised my eyebrows. So anyway, devotion, and I mean devotion in the sense that you devote yourself to something. This something in yoga is recommended to be something higher than yourself. So this can be God, but this can be also nature, can be a higher conscious, can be whatever you want to believe in, basically. So devotion in yoga doesn't really prescribe anything necessarily, but it does challenge you to find something, someone that you believe in more than you do yourself, something higher, meaning that something with higher qualities, or just a higher level of wisdom than yourself, right? Someone more knowledgeable, or someone wiser, and therefore why we tend to to go back to God or the universe. But it can also be yourself, it can be your own higher self. So yoga doesn't really tell you who or what to believe in, but it does encourage you to go on this journey to find what you believe in. And then once you find that thing that you believe in, then the point is that you devote all your actions, and more importantly, the outcome of your actions, to this entity, to this person, to this higher consciousness. And this is something that we've actually covered in a podcast before in a little bit more detail, because this is very connected with Bhakti Yoga. So if you want to know more about Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, I suggest you check episode, I believe it's episode 2 of this podcast. We dive a little deeper into this path of yoga. So anyway, the point here is that you devote the outcome of your actions to this entity. This means that you stop attaching yourself, you stop attaching emotions to the outcome of this action. So I'll give an example. Say you've got an exam that you're studying really hard for, or a deadline at work, and you're putting together this proposal. So you are working hard because you are doing your best, because you are devoted to your higher self and the best version of yourself. So you're working really hard, you're doing your best, but you're not putting any worth into whether the proposal is successful or not, or into you pass the exam or don't pass the exam. So you are focused on the action but you are not focused on the outcome of that action, because what matters when you are devoted and you're doing something with devotion, the results of the action, they lose importance, and instead you want to enjoy, you are in the moment and you give your best in that action without necessarily worrying about, will I be rewarded, will I be praised, will I be fired, will I be demoted. So there's no external pressure there and no need for external validation, because you yourself are giving your best, and are then giving the product of your action away to this higher entity. So it's this very interesting process of detachment and release that really helps you take the pressure off and really allows you to be, one, a lot more in the moment, to actually produce a better output, because you are focused in the moment without being nervous about it or questioning yourself all the time. And you also stop being so anxious about the result, because you are giving those worries away. What you're saying is that because you did your best, then that's all you could do at that time in that space. So the results of the actions, they're not up to you. You can let them go and know that you've done your best with what you knew, and that is enough. I'm just going to take a tiny little break here to let that settle a bit. And again, if things don't click immediately for you, don't worry, just open your mind and your heart to this, and allow whatever needs to come up to come up. Any questions, any doubts, any concerns, it's all accepted. So zero judgment here. I'm certainly not expecting you to just take this at its face value. So definitely use your critical thinking, inquire, reflect on this yourself. Now, about surrender, I think that these two are very closely connected, because surrender, it's precisely about letting go, and letting stop again attaching any value to whatever it is, the outcome of what you're doing. So devotion and surrender, they are connected, because I feel like it's very difficult for us, and this comes from my personal experience. It's very difficult for you to truly surrender and to truly give away the need for controlling the product of your actions without you having devotion and something higher than yourself to believe in and devote yourself to. Because devotion is a very altruistic process, and it's a very important journey where you separate yourself gradually from your ego. And if you're still very much being controlled by the ego, then it will be very difficult for you to really dissociate yourself from praise, from rewards, from criticism, and be fully in the moment, only focused on the action you're doing as opposed to the result of the action, which is the surrender. So it will be very difficult for you to really surrender if you are not already a believer in something higher than yourself, and if you haven't really initiated this process already of detaching yourself from the product of your actions. So these two concepts are very linked together. So it's actually very hard in hindsight for me to separate them, at least in my head. But they are so interesting, because as I continued my yoga practice and I started to separate and detach myself from the outcomes, I did notice that my anxiety reduced, and I wasn't experiencing anxiety as regularly as I was before. Again, this is all a process, and bearing in mind that I've been practicing yoga for 9 years, and in the grand scheme of things, 9 years is nothing. So I still know very, very little, and I'm sure that I've still experienced very little, but you do notice that you are no longer so worried about how you come across, you're no longer so worried about how you perform, because those things matter less. and less to you, you start being more, you start to enjoy more the journey as opposed to the destination, you know? So that will help you be less worried. That will also ease your fears about the future, because you stop thinking about the future so much. You're just enjoying the moment and where you are right now. I'm not saying that this is just a switch that you turn on and you turn off when when you need it. But it's something that is going to happen gradually. So I still have times, obviously, where I'm really worried about the outcome of my actions. I do have a yoga business, and I want my business to be successful. I want to be able to reach my more students and to grow my business. So sometimes when, a launch doesn't go so well, or I don't have many signups, obviously that does take a toll. And I do question it, but I've learned that through the process of devotion and surrender, I'm able to focus a lot more on my message, on what it is that I'm here to do, as opposed to the impact necessarily that I have. Knowing that even if I impact one person, and even if I help one person today, that will make me happy, and that will be more than enough, as opposed to me thinking about, I only had 2 people join my yoga class. I really wished I was teaching a class of 20 people, just to give you a bit of an example. So I do still go through these moments, but I'm able to recover from them a lot quicker. And I'm able to rewire my brain and my thought process into turning my attention to not to the outcome of my actions, but to the action in itself, and I question myself, but did I do my best? Yes. Okay, then well done. Give yourself a pat in the back. So it's certainly a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's been very rewarding to see this process, and really how resilient you become when you start relying on something higher than yourself, and you start detaching yourself from the product of your actions. So if there's anything that I want you to take away from this verbal brain dump that I've just recorded today, it's really for you to start noticing if there's any way where you could practice detachment, and allowing yourself to hand in the product of your actions to someone higher than yourself, something higher than yourself. And also, if you would like to go on this journey of finding this something, because it's for some of us, it takes a while. It took a while for me as well. I'm not necessarily a supporter of organized religion, so I had to reframe a lot my way of thinking, and how I related to devotion and into devoting myself to something. But again, the good thing is that you're free to choose whatever it is that you want to believe in. As a yogi myself, I tend to relate a bit more perhaps with the universe, with a higher consciousness. But for you, can be something else. Can be nature, can be Virgin Mary, can be whoever God is that you believe in. So there's really no right or wrong here, as long as you love this entity and you allow yourself to love and be devoted to this entity selflessly. So I certainly gave you lots to think about, lots to consider, lots to inquire, and this is a journey, this is a process. So don't think that you need to have answers to these questions and know exactly what you're doing next, but allow yourself to sit with that discomfort, allow yourself to sit and to feel that doubt, because that's usually the catalyst for you to realizing new perspective, new ideas. So, and if you meditate, if you have a meditation practice, and meditate about this, I'm sure you'll have your answers in no time, actually, because everything that we know, everything that we need is already within. All right, so I'll finish here today's episode, but as usual, we're going to now do a guided meditation just to help us integrate knowledge a little bit, help settle our minds after this intense discussion. So let's start. So find a comfortable position. You can sit with your legs crossed on a yoga mat if you can. You can also just sit comfortably on a chair, your sofa, the bed, as long as your feet are on the floor and you sit with your back upright. Now, as you settle into this position, I want you to rest your hands on your laps and close your eyes. Go within as you turn your attention to your inner world, your inner universe that is a lot deeper than you think it is, where you can find all the answers to your questions, to your desires. And as you concentrate within, notice how the rest of the world fades away to the background. You notice your breathing, your inhale, your exhale. And today, on the subject of detachment, devotion, surrender, we're going to use a technique to help us do exactly that, detach and surrender. This is actually one of my favorite meditation techniques and an incredibly powerful one. So what you want to do is listen and observe your breath without interfering. Don't slow your breath down. Release control. You are a witness to your breath. It's almost as if your breath is happening on the outside and you are just looking in, observing your natural inhale, your natural exhale. Stay with this practice, witnessing your breath without interfering, and meditate in silence. And if you are distracted by a noise, your body or your mind, acknowledge the distraction and come back to your breath as many times as you need. And don't be frustrated, because meditation is not the absence of thought, it is instead this process of learning how to control our minds and learning how to control where we focus on. So give yourself grace, give yourself time, and stay with the meditation for a little while longer. I'll bring you back when it's time. we finish here our meditation, and we also reach the end of episode 5 of the Lights On podcast. Thank you so much, as usual, for tuning in, for listening. I really hope this podcast inspires you to live a better life, and more importantly, that it gives you this belief that life can really have a lot more peace than we think, especially when we're in the midst of stress and anxiety. If you'd like to stay connected or to ask any questions, or if you have any comments, any feedback about this show, I'd love to hear from you. The best way is for you to follow me on Instagram. I'm at Yogaful.studio. And yeah, I'd love to connect over there. If you're also interested about my yoga classes or more in general about traditional yoga and about what I speak here, also give my website a visit and explore. And in case you feel called after watching this podcast, the website is also fairly easy. It's pretty much the same as my Instagram handles. So Yogaful.studio, that's where I'm at. Original, right? Keeping everything on brand. Anyway, thank you so much again. I hope you have a lovely rest to your day. Take care.